Inquiry Project Presentation for Communication 616 by Samantha Williams. For this presentation, I will discuss a case involving a small nonprofit organization, a conflict between two of the employees, two different communication ethics, issues that arise revolving around these communication ethics, recommendations for this case, as well as the implications if nothing is resolved and the implications if the recommendations are followed. The background for this case is a small nonprofit organization. It is mostly an educational organization that is in need of a strong volunteer base to help with the classes they offer and the programs they offer. A new position is created to help in this new direction. The position takes some of the assistant director's responsibilities with volunteers and creates a new position of volunteer manager and coordinator. An employee who has been working in one of the education programs is promoted into this management position with the assistant director as her direct supervisor. The assistant director, originally responsible for volunteers, had not had the time, along with all of her other responsibilities, to really create community connections or build a strong volunteer base. Part of the new employee, the promoted employee's orientation into this new position revolves around creating community connections, outreach to the community, and building a foundation for a strong volunteer program. Other smaller job responsibilities, such as helping with the education programs and the assistant director, and working with the assistant director, her direct supervisor, to build policies, procedures, rules, regulations, trainings, and orientations for future volunteers. As the employee begins to make connections, bring in volunteers, and build the volunteer program, the supervisor seems to have a moment of recognizing that she has lost the responsibility of an important part of the organization and tries to take it back. There are also moments where the supervisor creates a tense environment for the employee because the employee has taken a newer route for outreach, community communication, and training for volunteers that the supervisor herself does not agree with or different from what the supervisor had previously done. However, since there was no training on techniques on how to train and orient volunteers, the promoted employee has been forced to take it upon herself to create procedures and policies for training, orienting, communicating, and outreach for volunteers herself. This battle of control over the volunteer program leads to many miscommunications between the employee and the supervisor, as well as the employee and the executive director. There's also tension within the office because of the roundabout way the supervisor sometimes goes about communicating with the employee, or the supervisor will forget something said or arrive late to a meeting with the employee or a potential volunteer, and so on. This really causes tension. It creates a lack of productivity because of miscommunication and scheduling mishaps that happen between the employee and the supervisor. Frustrations really begin to rise not only for the employee but for the other office workers. There are a few big problems that I would like to pinpoint for this case, one of which is the lack of training given to the promoted employee. The supervisor seems to have an issue with the way that the promoted employee takes action for certain things and how she might go in a new direction than the supervisor had been taking or that she would take herself. But because there was no training to tell this employee that she should do things this way or that, she is unaware that the supervisor would prefer things another way. There is also no training that goes with the chain of command for the employee or how communication should really be handled between employee and supervisor. Should correspondence be primarily email? Should meetings always be scheduled to a T? Should she do written or verbal memos? These things were not discussed, and it helps along these miscommunications and really makes them worse. There was also a lack of proper communication about conflicts before the employee is promoted. By the supervisor's actions, there's obviously an issue to be had with this new position and losing some of her responsibilities, even though it has nothing to do with her actual work ethic or whether she was doing well or not doing well with this, and more that it needed the focus she couldn't give as one of the directors of the organization. The supervisor doesn't mention any of these issues, and these feelings and these thoughts can really be seen in the way that she treats this professional relationship. The supervisor is really trying to take control of the volunteer program now that she sees it's getting up off its feet, and she's trying to move it in a different direction that kind of leads towards what she's done in the past and not towards what the organization wants for its new path and its new direction. She begins pushing the employee into taking on responsibilities not previously discussed, pushing her towards the education department again, which is where she's not really supposed to be working unless the assistant director is unable to do those positions. And the employee really becomes frustrated at being pushed in a direction she was not supposed to be working in any longer. This frustration causes the employee to stop communicating with her supervisor and really take it on herself to take on more responsibility than she necessarily needs for a new position. One of the communication ethics that we will discuss is interpersonal communication ethics. This is having concern for the relationship, the actual concern for the actual individuals in the relationship, and making sure that they are connecting in a way that is promoting and protecting the good of what should come from this relationship. And of course, the relationship in this case study is one of a professional, of a supervisor, and an employee. A key concept for interpersonal communication ethics is distance. Distance is providing necessary space for each partner to contribute to the relationship. Distance really takes the demand out of a relationship. It is not a physical distance, but a mental distance. And this mental distance helps a relationship flow and grow in the way that it is supposed to. If you don't give a relationship distance and you push the boundaries and you demand more of it than it has to give in that moment, you can fracture the foundation of a relationship and you can really end a relationship before it starts. For this case, the supervisor's position in this relationship is as a mentor and a manager. But by focusing on her own feelings about this new position and the direction that the promoted employee is taking the volunteer management, she's not really focusing on the good of the relationship, and she's not giving it the distance it needs to grow. By not giving it the distance it needs, this program in general begins to fail. Another concept is interpersonal responsibility. This is taking an active measure towards caring for the interpersonal relationship. Having responsibility for a relationship is on all individuals involved. You need to actually think that the relationship is worth giving it responsibility and worth your effort to put in time to promote and protect the relationship. It is obvious in this case that the supervisor is not considering the relationship and the responsibility she needs to put into it to help grow this relationship. However, the employee also begins to back away from giving this relationship any sort of care because she fully expects the supervisor to reciprocate all effort that she puts in. But interpersonal responsibility calls for a person to not expect that. So when the employee stops committing to caring, she is also failing her responsibility to this relationship. Our next communication ethics will be business and professional communication ethics. This is reading the public direction of the organization as defined by its mission and purpose and to discern necessary moments of change. This new position is a necessary moment of change for this organization. Creating this position was for the good of the organization, is to help strengthen the organization, and by not considering that, the supervisor is really hurting the growth of the organization she is a director of. Dialectic of direction and change is being willing to take that step towards the new direction and let go of the past. And I realize this is something that is difficult for some people, especially in a business and professional relationship. You have done things a certain way for so long that it is difficult to take a step in a new direction, especially when it is not necessarily your choice. So the employee in this position are the different direction, and the assistant director is not willing to follow this path because it's something that's been more pushed on her, which is what causes a big issue for this business and professional communication ethics. Recommendations would be the dialogic ethic. This is listening, attentiveness, and negotiation between all parties of the interpersonal relationship. Listening is hearing what the other person is saying without demanding more, less, or anything other from that person or the relationship. This dialogic ethic also requires both parties to be attentive to what is guiding their actions and thoughts, as well as what is guiding the other person's actions as thought, and what is guiding the relationship. It is also attentiveness to the changes of relationships and accepting that relationships are like the ocean. They come, they go, they ebb, they flow. They really are just ever changing. The negotiation part of this ethic is communication between parties and planning out the next steps and actions based off what has been discussed and heard. This is really deciding what is going to be best for this interpersonal relationship based off everything that has been discussed, and making sure that you are making the right decision for the relationship. I also recommend discussing communication techniques at the beginning of every new professional interpersonal relationship. And really, the organization should give more focus on the interpersonal relationships and making sure that everybody involved is committed to being responsible to that relationship and caring for it and promoting the good of that relationship and not allowing personal feelings to get in the way of that. If these recommendations are not followed, more than likely you're going to have a loss of employees. Productivity is going to lower even further. Tension within the office is going to affect all employees, and for this organization, that tension can also affect the students. And this negative relationship between this employee and the supervisor not only affects the inner workings of this organization, but it's going to affect the community outside as well. And that does not give a good view for the organization. And they can lose sponsors and community partners if this negative relationship grows further. If the recommendations are implemented and importance is placed on interpersonal relationships and there is real work done between the communication and correspondence procedures between employee and supervisor, then this relationship will be nourished, the good will be fixed, and there will be a better workflow, more productive programs and projects, a larger community base, and volunteers to come and help strengthen the organization. The goal of this new position was to start a volunteer program, and if the recommendations are followed, then that goal can be accomplished. Thank you for your time. I hope this was helpful. Have a good night.